The People of Indus, and subtitle, And the Birth of Civilization in South Asia. Now this is by Nikhil Gulati, and with Jonathan Mark Kenoyer. Kenoyer. Again, pronunciation not my friend or strong point. Either way, this is the first of two books that you'll be seeing. There were pretty much recommendations from Anshuman over in For the Love of Comics. In For the Love of Comics? He is For the Love of Comics. He picked this as one of his best reads of 2022, and as soon as I saw him flicking through it, I thought, yeah, that would be an interesting read. It looks like it's right up my street. Because it's a non-fiction book looking at the people of Indus, this ancient civilization that existed over 4,500 years ago, that occupied this area next to the Indus River in South Asia. This book is visualizing that story because, as the author says in the opening introduction, he was keen, after he was bitten by the bug of finding out more and more about this ancient civilization, he wanted to visualize them. He wanted to represent them visually, which hadn't been done that well. There was a few academic works out there, but nothing to visually imagine what this community and what this ancient race of people looked like, what they lived like, how they interacted with the world around them, all that type of thing. And so this is his take on that, because he knew the comics would be an amazing medium to get across that story. And as far as I'm concerned, it's an exceptional book with a really engaging, wonderful story with only two drawbacks, which I will get to later on. The book starts off with an imagining of what life was like in this community in one of the major cities back thousands of years ago, and it basically just shows people making products, traveling to the main city, bartering those products, showing a bit of their architecture, their artwork, without using any words really. And then it zips to the modern day, where we get our narrator, who, as far as I'm aware, I'm pretty sure that they don't give him a name in this book, but let's assume that it is the author. But either way, he takes us on this journey discovering this ancient civilization. He describes wandering through the ruins of the present day kind of, cities and towns that are there, and not really getting across the scale of what was there. And then it's basically telling the story of how this city's architecture and pottery and the ruins and the remains were loosely kind of, excavated in the 1920s, as a lot of ancient civilizations were at that point. People really had the bug in, the early 20th century to excavate these ancient remains, and this part of the world was not escaping that either. But what they started uncovering was a civilization, the scope of which was basically unthinkable. His history had it in his mind that we know all these major ancient civilizations, we know the scale of them, and though these people were known, the scale of it didn't really come to pass until the excavations were carried out, and the depth and the detail of their civilization didn't come to pass. And the book really goes to town in showing how important these sites are, the structures, the buildings, the streets, the water courses, how they used the natural landscape, how they were expert sailors, what they did for a living, all of these things. It goes into minute detail in many, many respects of this community. And the community is not just one city, it's many, many towns and many, many cities all along the banks of the various kind of rivers next to and adjacent to the Indus River. One of the things I really like, though, is how the author keeps jumping back and forth to these imagined faces and people back 4,000 odd years ago, where there's no real firm evidence as to how these people would live. We can piece together bits and make educated guesses from archaeology and things like that, but what the author tries to do is actually give a face and a routine to the day for these people. And I like them because these little whimsical kind of fantasies about how the community lived back 4,000 years ago. But the main bulk of this book is very much kind of looking into every element of that ancient civilization, from architecture to how the streets were set up, to the hierarchy, to did it have kings, queens, emperors, If it didn't, what did it have? How did society work within that framework and all that type of thing? Looking at the scale of the building, looking at the written word, all that type of thing. It really does pull apart all those different elements of this ancient civilization. I would go as far to say is it's written very much in the same way as you would approach kind of an academic article. You know, it is cleanly referenced in places. It offers counter arguments to certain arguments as well. So the author might put across, you know, one argument, but then will put it at the end that this is highly debatable, this is, you know, not to be determined and all that type of thing. So it's very much worded as an academic article in many ways. The other thing that it does really well is it breaks down the investigatory kind of approach to finding out about this community. So it breaks down archaeology essentially. It tells you, okay, we know this because archaeology works like this. You go down the layers, you find this layer here, so that makes it older at the bottom, but then you can piece it together because of this, and this type of material comes from there. And so it kind of is almost like a beginner's guide to archaeology in a way. And if you were to kind of take out those bits, a big chunk of the book would be missing really, because he does often go off in tangents explaining how we know this about this community, and then linking it in with other historical finds in Mesopotamia and other parts of the world, and other historical finds and linking those in. So piecing together this puzzle almost from different archaeological sites and theories across that area. But then this book explains that quite clearly. We know this because of this. And so it's not a straightforward narrative of the community really. It's a look at how we excavate ancient civilization sites and how we come to find out more about them. But it does a really good job as well of putting the Indus into its own bracket, because there's a lot of competition for significant ancient civilizations in that neck of the woods really. But he does an exceptional job of outlining, okay, it is different from all of these other ancient civilizations because it doesn't have this, it doesn't have that, and it really does give the whole culture its own unique feel. Even artistically, it might look like Egyptian influences coming in, but they're not. They're slightly different. They've got a different approach to this, different way of making that. And the narrator does a wonderful job of just guiding you through very, very wonderfully paced kind of, you know, orderly way of taking you through this narrative, introducing you things about archaeology that you might not know already, introducing and telling you about how watercourses were important for this and this, and how that would have improved life, how we know this and all that. It's fabulous. He even goes into detail explaining why, you know, they didn't build pyramids, for example, why they didn't kind of go down that road, and how that made them unique and separate. But equally, it kind of goes into detail about how they had other technological advancements that they didn't have, Egyptians and things like that. So yeah, it is a wonderful book, and it certainly gave me a lot of food for thought in thinking about ancient civilizations in that way, because they all do broadly, in my mind, when I think of them, fit into a template. But the Indus civilization, through this book, I realise are very different. They're structured differently. And so we can't really look at ancient civilizations and assume a standardized template across them all kind of linking in as one. You know, they've all got these superstructures, they all do this, they all do that. But the people of Indus shows that it's not quite that. It's different. There's a lot of nuances, there's a lot of differences, there's a lot of things going on that you don't really know until you look into the finer details of it all. One of the things he goes in detail to as well is the written language that was used in this area and used by the communities around the Indus River, and how it's still untranslated. It still hasn't been unlocked. It still holds the mysteries of this ancient civilization. Because the written language is still undecipherable, a lot of the history of this community has had to be pieced together exclusively through archaeological means, really. And so that is a major problem, and he goes in depth in talking about how unique this language style is, but equally how many people have tried to interpret it and fail, and how it's this source of knowledge that we just can't get past. We can't seem to kind of decipher it, to understand the meaning behind it. But instead of telling you the meaning behind it, he tells you the reasons why we can't decipher it and how we can decipher other languages, but not this language, and comparing it to other languages, and then goes into detail about how languages are translated in general and all this type of thing. And he does try to put into context, okay, what happened to end this community as well. So the story does have quite a definitive kind of beginning, middle and end, but it doesn't have an end in terms of the historical investigation. It's all a conversation starter, because it's still unwritten to a certain degree, because we can't decipher that language, because we're still finding more from the archaeological sites, we're still finding out more from the finds and everything like that, that something could still happen to totally blow out to the water everything that's pieced together here. It's a starting piece. It's a great kind of start to this story, I think, and it's definitely there to be changed. But if it is changed, then the author would probably be well happy with that, because that means he's found out more about the community there, because that's the only way it's going to change now, is if they keep investigating and keep making finds and hopefully translate that ancient script, really, which is really frustrating and annoying, I think. Not that I could be any help whatsoever on that front. There's only two drawbacks that I said about this book at the start. The first is I do think that he tends to over-explain certain things that he doesn't need to. Like, for example, the process of archaeological digs and, how they structured the idea of how you translate the language, all that type of thing. All of that is great information, but to a certain degree, it detracts and distracts a little bit from the main narrative of the book, the story of these people. While it is fascinating and interesting, now and again, I wanted to get back to that story. But it wasn't to the extent that it annoyed me or irritated me. I just now and again thought to myself, oh, I want to get back to that story. But again, it was a minimal kind of criticism at best, to be honest. The major criticism is in the build. The thinness of the paper is mega annoying. It really is. The book is published by Penguin Books, and it is a wonderfully oversized book. Sewn binding, all in black and white. No dust jacket, lovely art on the cover and on the boards. There's an amazing quote from For the Love of Comics in the front, which is great to see him and to read his thoughts on the book is fabulous. But the paper quality is so drastically thin. You can see everything on the other side of the page, no matter where you are in the book. No matter where the book is, no matter whether it's lying flat, no matter whether you're holding it up against the light, or any way you look at it, and it is quite annoying. Particularly when the artwork, in my opinion, is stunning. It's simplistic, it's straightforward, it does everything you would want it, and it brings to life this magical world that has been lost, that literally lays underground. No one knows really what's there, and he, through his amazingly simplistic but detailed art, has just brought it back to life. And thin paper annoys me, because the artwork is lovely and I don't want the thin paper distracting me from that. But either way, they're quite minimal criticisms, not massive, to be honest, because I do think that you would enjoy this book if you like history, and it is definitely a great recommendation from For the Love of Comics, and I'm looking forward to talking about the other one that he recommended some time ago. But thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.